Bonjour, my name is David Devere. I'm a wine and spirits educator and world traveler. You're watching Savvy Nomad TV. This is the Eau de Vie edition, and this is episode 3 of tasting these tiny little bottles of whiskey from this beautifully presented whiskey box. I hope you're enjoying these. If you've got a box, I hope you are following along. Now, this is a world tour, a whiskey tour of the world. That's the way it is branded, and the whiskey spelling here is W-H-I-S-K, and then in the middle there's a tiny little E and a Y. Now the book doesn't explain the story. Why is there an E in whiskey and how did it get there? Well, today's whiskeys are an Irish whiskey and an Australian whiskey, and the Irish whiskey is spelled with an E and the Australian one is not. Let's talk about why that is, because it's the Irish that add the E in whiskey. Now, the oldest distillery in the world is Bushmills, that's in Ireland, and they've been making whiskey there since 1608. If you contrast that with the oldest whiskey distillery in Scotland, it's Glenturret, and they've been making whiskey there since 1763. So the Irish have a good 150 plus years of making whiskey tradition over the Scots. And the Scots knew this. They knew that the Irish were making a lot of money on whiskey, and they wanted in on this liquid gold mine. And so they started making their own whiskeys. In the 1800s, they developed new ways of making whiskey, and one of those was with this thing called a column still, a continuous column still. And so the Scots started making whiskeys with a column still, and you could just feed this thing almost perpetually. And then they started blending whiskeys from different distilleries together. Why would you do that? Well, if one distillery makes pretty good whiskey and another distillery makes crummy whiskey, you can blend the crummy with the pretty good and you can get okay. And now you can sell the crummy where you could really before only sell the pretty good. Now the crummy gets sold too. Haha, increased profits. So you blend it together and you make an okay whiskey. And so the Scots were doing that, and they were also using different types of grain, corn and oats and other things, rye, other than just barley. And when the Irish heard about this, the Irish who've been making whiskey for 100 plus years longer than the Scots had, said, hey, wait a minute, you're not allowed to do that. You've got to use 100% barley, and you've got to use a pot still, and it's got to come from one source. You're not allowed to blend this together. We've been spending all our time building this brand called whiskey. And the Irish didn't spell it with an E. They spelled it just like the Scots do now, W-H-I-S-K-Y, whiskey. So the Scots said, you know what, you don't have a world lease on the word whiskey. We can make it however we want and we can sell it under that label. It became quite the controversy. It went all the way to Parliament in London because Ireland at the time was part of the United Kingdom. And there was a royal commission, and the royal commission decided the Scots were right. Anybody can use the word whiskey. There's no patent on that word. Nobody should be guaranteed that when you buy a thing called whiskey, it comes with any form of quality. And the Irish just thought that was terrible. Just terrible. So they changed the name. They spelled it W-H-I-S-K-Y. The key to quality is the key in whiskey. And the whiskey comes from Ireland. This is their thought. This is their rebranding. And so they added an E so that people, consumers, would know the difference between whiskey that isn't made in an Irish tradition and whiskey that is. The Americans copied the Irish tradition. Now, of course, the Americans were making a different thing called bourbon, but they also started copying the way the Irish made it, and they called it whiskey with a K, with a K-E-Y, K-E-Y, key. So that's how the E gets made. Irish whiskey production used to be on the top. It was the top of the hill. Bushmills was making more whiskey at one point than the entire country of Scotland was making combined, just one. But when Ireland gained independence, they lost that British market, and it went like this. And Scotch went on the ascendance, and Irish whiskey went on a descendance. About 2010, there were only 4 distilleries left in Ireland. That's pretty harsh for a country that is really one of the crucibles of whiskey production in the world. They literally set up the recipe. The Scots had many, many more distilleries and were making a lot of money. Now there's been a renaissance in Irish whiskey. There's over 50 distilleries in Ireland, but there's still over 100 distilleries in Scotland. Interestingly enough, while the Scots still make a lot of blended whiskey, some of their best examples are what we call single malt Scotch, which is one distillery, 100% barley, and a pot still. That's exactly the recipe that the Irish said you have to do to make good whiskey. Okay, that's how the E gets into whiskey. Let's go outside and taste this Irish example and our Australian example. So we brought you this morning, again, another morning, we brought you to the shores of Lake Superior, and it's a crisp, late fall morning. My fingers are chilly. The waves are...
Watch your feet!
The waves are coming in. Hopefully you can see some of them in the... Maybe we'll get a splash over. Hopefully not splash me. Yep. Never turn your back on the lake.
Never turn your back on Mother Nature.
Okay, so let's see. What's our first whiskey today?
We're on number 5, Ballykeefe Distillery, Ireland. And artisan, family-owned, entirely independent, single estate whiskey distillery, which was built in 2016 to diversify a working family farm for successive generations.
These people grow their own grain, and this is triple distilled. Ireland, of course, has a long history of making and producing whiskey.
Right.
Let's see what we smell. My nose is so cold.
Yeah, but there's nothing else in the air to make us smell something else besides
stone
the whiskey.
Fruit. A little bit of a sweet aroma. It smells like Irish whiskey.
Irish whiskey. So they're saying gentle notes of toasted oak, citrus, and coconut resolving to apple sponge.
All right, I'm going to taste it and then I'll give you.
Sounds good. Okay. Whew, that's aromatic.
It is sweet and caramely in the mouth. It's a little bit spicy. I let it roll around on my palate quite a bit. It's smooth and it's got a long, lingering finish. This is really nice.
It's sweet. Smooth.
Spicy.
It has it's definitely spicy. Long lasting. Take it from the top.
She's got her little mittens on. Whee! And just drop the glass onto this stone and it would just shatter.
That would be a bummer. Okay, so the notes say the palate is at first malt and fruit dominate, with mango and a hint of ripe banana. Then toffee apple fades to creme brulee.
Toffee apple, yeah.
Well,
creme
I felt
brulee.
like it had a thicker body.
Certainly.
So,
I've eaten enough creme brulee in my life.
And the finish, long finish with notes of apple custard and a hint of cloves.
It's got a nice long finish.
It was nice. And for being so early in the morning, I didn't even mind it. And that's after brushing my teeth.
Okay, the next one is Archie Rose Distillery. This is made in Australia. The guy who started this, he's decided that he's going to really highlight Australia. He uses all Australian malts. There are like 7 different types of barley in this. So he goes around Australia buying different types of barley, malting everything, doing it all himself. This is quite extraordinary. Check out the website. I've linked it in the description and on the QR code in the lesson. They go really into the details about how they make this stuff, and it's quite interesting. They also do gins and vodkas.
It says it was founded in 2014, 2024 now, of course, so that's 10 years old. And it was one of Sydney's first distilleries in 160 years. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Nice dark caramel color in this too.
So, nose of fresh herbs, shortbread biscuits.
Ooh, it's so different.
Raisins, toffee, and dark chocolate. Oh, I can't wait to smell
Raisins, yeah, for sure. Or I would get prune. If this was a wine,
Yeah.
I'd say it'd be a prune aroma.
It definitely looks darker than the Irish whiskey. Oh. Okay.
Ooh, that's smoky.
Well, that is a really different aroma.
Totally different than the Irish whiskey. The Irish whiskey was spicy and smooth. This is smoky, a little bit of raisin, a little bit of prune.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting tasting these side by side like this.
That is smoky. Okay. Oh, I was not expecting that.
It's got a real cigar smoke aroma.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's now, I get the chocolate on the back side. It's sitting in my mouth for a while, and there is kind of a dark, bitter chocolate flavor coming
I'm waiting
about.
for that.
That's quite extraordinary. In wine, we'd call that complexity.
Complexity, right.
Yeah.
The palate notes here say it's luscious with well-integrated flavors of sticky date pudding. Never had that. And amaretto, and the finish of espresso. Because I suppose espresso is so dark roasted, then you get that dark, smoky, chocolatey.
Well, this was very good. Okay, I did put some pricing in here. In the book. What do my little notes say?
Who can tell when they've got their gloves on? Okay, well, this one that we just
The Archie
tried,
Rose, you can buy it in Australia only for 120 Aussie dollars. That's about 78 bucks. And the Irish one, let me help you.
Yeah, help.
The Irish one, you can get it stateside, 50 bucks a bottle.
Say, that's not bad.
Okay, so I hope
Awesome.
you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please give us a thumbs up. And if
Whiskey
you're
to
new
the
here,
world.
please consider subscribing. We'll be back next week as we continue to show you more of what our region has, and we taste whiskeys, maybe not so early in the morning.
Not
always.
quite so early.
Okay, I hope you've enjoyed today. Until tomorrow or next week,
Yeah.
I say a tout to there and cheers.
Cheers.